Well, good evening, everybody, and happy Breeders' Cup Eve, and welcome to our handicapping discussion on this night before Breeders' Cup Friday. And we've brought together a great panel for you tonight. Some experts from the industry. Nick Tammaro, a jack of all trades, is with us, an odds maker, handicapper. He's involved in podcasts, of course, the track announcer. He's actually joining us live from the front runner over at Santa Anita as he is on track and gearing up for the BCBC contest. We have Vance Hanson with us, a contributor and author for Brisnet, international racing expert. And Vance, great products there at Brisnet. The International Scouting Report is now available for all of the European and Japanese invaders over there at Brisnet.com. So be sure to head on over to Brisnet and check out the International Scouting Report. And our very own James Scully, Churchill Downs handicapper and racing analyst as well, contributed with us at TwinSpires. So great panel to talk about some of these Breeders' Cup races for you tonight. We are not going to talk about each and every race. We're not going to be going on for hours and hours here. We're going to approach this like we approach our wagering, taking our best opinions, talking about them, being concise with you, and turning that into our best possible wagering opportunities. So we are going to get you queued up for that. We want to remind you, we do have a great offer at TwinSpires.com. The Breeders' Cup money back offer gets underway tomorrow on Friday. We have it covering all the Breeders' Cup races on both Friday and Saturday, up to $10 money back for your horse if he runs second or third. And don't forget as well at Brisnet.com, our partners over there, the Brisnet Ultimate Breeders' Cup Handicapping Package. Everything that you need to know about the Breeders' Cup, the ins and outs, the statistics, all the horses, whether they be American runners or international runners as well. Be sure to go to Brisnet.com and get that Ultimate Breeders' Cup Handicapping Package so you have everything you need for the championship event this weekend. So, guys, let's waste no time here as we dive right into the racing action. Again, looking at some of the races that we have some of the strongest viewpoints about. And we're going to start off taking a look at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf. Guys, this is a race that 12 of the 15 runnings of this race have actually been won by U.S.-based runners, which might come as a bit of surprise to some. And a couple of those U.S.-based runners that have looked pretty good. We'll start with a look here at She Feels Pretty, who won the Grade 1 Natalma Stakes up at Woodbine. And Vance, we'll start with you. I know that you're pretty high on this filly. She has looked absolutely sensational in her first two starts.
You're absolutely right about that. The trip that she got in the Natalma at Woodbine was terrific, a terrific ride by John Velasquez. And this filly just exploded down the lane, won very comfortably. She looks to me like the horse to beat here. And kind of going back to what you said about the American dominance of this race, 12 for 15. And it's the exact opposite in the juvenile turf for the Colts, where the Europeans have been dominant. The Europeans typically don't send their best fillies over here for this race, which I think makes a significant difference in the lopsided nature of America versus Europe. A couple of 2-year-old fillies they have sent over this year. We've got Porta Fortuna, who comes off of a victory in the Cheveley Park Stakes. Not a great rendition of that, I don't think. Perhaps the European to be concerned about here is Carla's Way, who comes off of a victory in the Rockville Stakes at Newmarket. The form of that race has worked out really well. The second and third came back to run 1-2 in the Group 1 Fillies Mile over at Newmarket as well. And then two back, Carla's Way ran second to a filly named Darnation, who repeated in the Grade 2 Mayhill at Doncaster. So Carla's Way, I think, of the Europeans might be the one to be concerned about among the shippers. But overall, I think She Feels Pretty is really the filly to beat here.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Nick, how about yourself when we talk about She Feels Pretty? This is a race where you take a look at a huge field. A lot of people might be including a lot of horses in here. What's your approach to this race? Is this a race where you try to zag when everybody zigs, or does it look like She Feels Pretty might be that much the best?
Yeah, I think in a multi-race play, by all means, there's a big advantage to trying to go narrow in a situation like this where you're dealing with quite possibly a 4-1 or 9-2 favorite. Those are going to be races where people generally go 5, 6, 7 deep. And I think going one deep, two deep, something like that. If you have an opinion, there's just such a huge advantage to doing so. That's what I'm going to do with a horse like Carla's Way. I was glad to hear Vance endorse her a little bit. I thought her last race was really terrific, especially when you pick apart the nature of that race with her being close to the pace and then ultimately holding off two horses that both came back and ran very well. So this is a race where Carla's Way is going to be very prominent on my multi-race tickets, and any of my intra-race betting is definitely going to include a win bet on her and some very focused exactas over the other horses that I think can contend for a piece.
Good deal. James, we're going to show one more replay before we get some of your viewpoints on here. An American runner that I was a little bit high on because she ran a really fast race on the day was Austere at the Kentucky Downs Juvenile Fillies. Austere ran considerably faster on this day than the Colts did in the juvenile counterpart. Now, I know Kentucky Downs runners have not been good in Breeders' Cups for the most part, especially the Breeders' Cups that have been run in California. But I thought this was a pretty impressive effort, James. And at 12-1 or in that ballpark, she's a filly that might attract some of my attention, especially from an exotic standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 for 2 so far for Brendan Walsh. And, one thing about Astera is, and you can watch this replay, I mean, she does have like some tactical foot. That's one thing when she feels pretty that I will say. I mean, she has not gotten out of the gate very well in either start. One of them was a sprint at Ellis Park that she just came running late to win in. That her last race in the Talma was a one-turn mile, and she was able to work out some positioning on the backstretch. But I'd be a little bit worried perhaps if she was like next to last or last in the early going. As well as Austere, the other American I got to mention is Chad Brown's Hard to Justify. He's won the race a bunch of times. His first Breeders' Cup win came in the Juvenile Fillies turf. This is a filly that is 2 for 2 so far by the hottest, arguably, sire in the world presently, Justify. And after winning her debut from off the pace, granted it was a slow pace, but I did like the fact that she showed some tactical foot. And I think if she can, get good positioning, it looks like Dreamfire is going to come rolling out of the gate from the far outside. We'll see how much other pace is in the field, but perhaps Flavian Pratt and Hard to Justify could work out a good trip, Darin.
Yeah, some interesting different viewpoints here. One filly from overseas that I thought was interesting as a price was Lonely, who's 15-1 in the morning line. She chased down Dawn Charge. Well, didn't chase her down. She got within the neck of her last time, where she was making a strong rally in the stretch and looked to me like a filly that was going to get better going a route of ground. She's never really run a bad race. She's got a couple of wins, including a Group 3. She was a solid third behind a runner in here that's drawn to the outside that's been in good form as well. So I thought from the European runners, if I was looking for a price play, I thought she was a little bit interesting. Manny Franco getting aboard for Philip D'Amato, who's training this European runner, who's actually been in his barn for just a bit. So no surprise, a race that on paper looks pretty competitive, and you have a lot of different viewpoints here amongst the panel. A race that I think is probably going to be a little bit more honed in on is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, as there seems to be maybe a little bit of a top-heavy approach to this. And guys, we'll start with with Timberlake, who's a horse that after his effort in the Champagne Stakes, and we could pull up that replay now, a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon. Nick, let's start with you. Timberlake coming out party there in the Champagne Stakes. What was your take on his performance there, and was it the type of effort that you saw springboarding him as a major contender here in the Juvenile?
Yeah, and I promise no cringeworthy Timberlake puns from me on this one, but not saying anything like he said bye. I promise, no more. It looks like he really took a step forward in this race. He had hinted at having some pretty serious ability. I think the problem that a lot of people, handicappers, ran into with regards to the hopeful was that we were disappointed with the race from a speed figure perspective. It was a lot slower than was expected, but one of the things, and having made figures in the past, one of the things that crossed my mind immediately was that this is a race that kind of probably lived in isolation. There were a lot of turf races around it. It was towards the end of the card, obviously. So I didn't want to hold it against him too much. I thought he was terrific at Aqueduct in that Champagne in the Belmont at the Big A meet. I think he's going to end up going off favored here, but I like John White's approach. Better to just throw them all at 4-1 behind locked and let everybody sort it out in terms of the betting public. I think this is going to be a race where you have four horses about as close in odds in a Breeders' Cup race as you'll ever see, because it's very hard for the public, I think, to as you said, hone in on one specifically that looks like he's going to get much.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there. Vance, how about yourself? This horse here, probably going to be favored. I have the same viewpoint as Nick. Is he the horse to beat in here?
He might be. I haven't seen any of these horses in the flesh, but just what I've seen on television, he looks fairly physically imposing compared to some of the other competition. I give Nick his points about the hopeful, but part of me thinks I just can't get past that loss. It was a very substandard hopeful as far as time was concerned, speed figures. And granted, Timberlake did take a huge step forward in the Champagne, although he may have benefited quite a bit from the sloppy track that day. This is just something that's going to be resolved, and we'll find out more where everybody stands after Saturday's race.
James, pretty top heavy race. As Nick mentioned, we got 4 horses between 7-2 and 4-1 on the morning line. Curious for your take here on Timberlake as well.
Yeah, I thought he took a huge step forward without blinkers. And as far as that hopeful goes, I mean, he's a young horse that if things weren't going his way in his debut, he ran 6th and then he breaks his maiden by 9 lengths. So, I mean, if I could see where he had trouble early in the hopeful and then he had a tough trip in the stretch, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I love the turn of foot he showed. As far as like upside, I mean, I think the Juvenile has like serious contenders coming from 3 races, and the Champagne with Timberlake and even the runner-up General Partner and the American Pharaoh with Muth. They both ran real strong figures. As far as the Breeders' Futurity winner, Locked, who we'll get to, his number didn't come back as fast as those, but he had a troubled trip. He was wide on both turns, and he really had sort of that effort that reminds you of Forte last year. So I do think it's a situation where bettors, I'm willing to take a stand against Prince Monaco coming off the Del Mar Futurity. I think the bettors have 3 real strong win options with Timberlake, Locked, and Muth. I like Timberlake best because of his turn of foot. But like I said, and we're watching the Breeders' Futurity right now with Locked, there's a lot to be said for this effort, Darin. It was, like I said, it reminded me of Forte's hard-fought win in the Breeders' Futurity last year. I don't know if anybody else had that thought process after the race.
Yeah, I was showing you the first turn where he was extremely wide going into that first turn, was extremely wide on the second turn where he made an aggressive move. Remember that short stretch of the mile and a 16th at Keeneland. And I mean, he's almost had parked out here about 6-7 wide as they move into this first turn. And then they're going to come into the far turn. And he's still racing 3-4 wide while advancing and making a strong move. Now he kind of catapults past horses. And once he hits the lead here, guys, he gets, I don't know if he's getting a little bit tired at this point. He's getting a little bit lazy. He lugs in here. He bumps the wine steward down to the inside, ends up digging in and getting the job done. I thought he ran very wide. And the interesting thing here is, like, from the Ragozin standpoint, they finished within a half length of each other, but they're separated by 4 points on the Ragozin. So to know how one horse was that wide and one horse saved all of the ground. But Vance, your take on Locked here, the 2 wide turns, the big move, and then kind of waiting on his rival to the inside through the stretch.
Yeah, big effort. And I agree with James that it was very reminiscent of Forte's performance in the Breeders' Futurity last year. And this race seems just a bit more competitive than last year's. I mean, it was basically kind of a 2-horse race last year on paper between Forte and K-Rock to an extent. This one's a lot more deep. And obviously, he has to ship out to California this time rather than stay in Kentucky.
No question about it. Nick, you had mentioned that you thought the morning line was a smart move and having the 4 horses kind of throwing a blanket over them. What do you think is fair value? What price is right on a horse like Locked?
I think so, anywhere around 3-1 or 7-2 is fair. I don't envision him being quite a bit shorter than that. I think of the 4 horses that are priced between 7-2 and 4-1, the one that's most likely to go up in odds is Prince of Monaco. It feels like he has kind of the reverse leader in the clubhouse ankle, in that during his inactivity, everybody got better, and his Del Mar Futurity actually started to kind of look worse. So I think if anybody drifts up, it's definitely going to be him. But I think 3-1 or 7-2 on Locked seems pretty fair.
A horse that's definitely going to be a higher price than we thought after his debut is the Todd Pletcher trained fierceness. When you go back and you look at his maiden special weight win, which we have that replay for you, a lot of people were buzzing about the effort. Now, it's certainly worth mentioning the fact that he is not the first 2-year-old to debut freakishly good in the mud. And it's a question of if he's going to run back to that performance again. Obviously, you had a Jekyll and Hyde situation here where he couldn't have looked any better in his debut and probably couldn't have looked any worse when he ran in the Champagne. So I'm just going to kick it around to the group here. Which version of fierceness is closer to actually what he is? The maiden win or what we saw in the Champagne? Vance, let's start with you on that one.
It could be in between. I'm not so sure. I'm kind of hoping it's we'll see the Jekyll this time, because I think fierceness is going to at least offer a little bit of value in this race. And I kind of like the confidence that trainer Todd Pletcher and owner Mike Rapoli are giving this colt. They're kind of throwing that Champagne out and taking a shot here. And I think possibly if they thought he wasn't quite up to it, they'd back off and maybe shoot for some other race to end the year, possibly at Aqueduct. But maybe they're showing a bit of confidence, and he's definitely worth a look and as a possible rebound candidate. James,
Jekyll or Hyde on fierceness?
I'm thinking Hyde. I don't like. I mean, to me, he has to go from the starting gate after that disastrous start last time in the Champagne, and I didn't like the outside draw for fierceness. And I know Darin, you'd made mention of it on social media earlier. With the jockey losing Irad Ortiz to Noted, his stablemate wasn't a positive sign either. So I'm taking a little bit of a negative view towards fierceness.
Yeah, I tried to find if there was a reason for that. I didn't know if it was reported or if it was just Irad choosing to ride Noted. Noted is owned by Mike Rapoli, is trained by Todd Pletcher. It's the exact same connections. So, Nick, kind of interesting to see Irad head on over to Noted. What did you take away from that? Is that Irad's choice? He likes Noted better, likes him better long term, or do you think there's something else there?
I'll tell you, Darin, I am utterly clueless. I have no idea. Yeah. This makes no sense at all. Nothing really about this horse makes a great deal of sense to me. A huge figure win in the slop. Runbacks have all been good. Everything was in position for this horse to run well in the Champagne, and he was a complete and total no-show. And if you remember back to earlier in the week, we only found out that Noted was going here on Monday. So before they drew the race, we found out Noted was going here. So Irad at some point opted to ride Noted instead of fierceness, which, again, that doesn't make any sense because he's getting the choice mounts for this ownership and obviously for Todd Pletcher as well. So, yeah, what I can tell you is that I would never bet this horse at 6-1. I have a pretty strong feeling he's going to go up from there because I really don't think the public is going to be that forgiving in terms of throwing out his last race, not when you see so many real win candidates like those top 4 choices.
Yeah, definitely agree there. I think he's going to offer a price for the believers, but we'll see which version of fierceness shows up. A lot of different ways to go. I think there's 3 or 4 major win contenders, a very compelling edition, and a good betting edition of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That's a wrap on Friday. We're going to talk about those 2. We're going to flip the page to Saturday. The Dirt Mile is a race that sometimes doesn't get the same type of glamour that some of the other races get, but I felt we had to talk about this race because, of course, it carries the best story from last year's Breeders' Cup in Cody's Wish. Guys, obviously the conversation has to start with him. Nick, I'll come to you here with Cody's Wish, who has looked incredible training since arriving at Santa Anita. Is this the same Cody's Wish as last year? The figures are not as strong. He has a defeat, granted around 9 furlongs, but coming into the race, do you feel that we're going to get the same type of Cody's Wish that we saw in last year's Breeders' Cup?
I really do. I think we're going to get a big shot from Cody's Wish for sure. The training reportedly has been very, very good. Looks like he's settled in out here nicely. And I think his Whitney is being held against him erroneously. I really don't think he had much of an opportunity to run well in there with the slow break, the very, very moderate pace, and the fact that he's probably not as good as he looked in the Met Mile and the Churchill Downs Handicap. He's definitely not as bad as he looked in the Whitney. So he falls somewhere in between. this is a particularly weak field top to bottom, and he's supposed to handle these horses very easily, unless we see maybe some type of extreme bias, which we won't really know because there'll be one dirt race before this, and the inside is very good that could help a horse like Zozos. I see him absolutely laying over this field, and I think that anybody who wants to say that the Vosburg was maybe a little underwhelming and use that against him, I don't think that's the right approach either. I think he's every bit as good as he was last year. I look at him as a very, very likely winner.
Yeah, I think that's a popular take, and I agree. This field did not come up particularly strong. James, last year he won at Keeneland around 2 turns. Some people saying he's shipping to California. He's got to go around 2 turns again. They still believe that he's best at a 1 turn 7 furlong, 1 turn mile. Does the 2 turns here going around two again bother you, or does it not matter because he won doing this trip last year?
It really doesn't bother me. And there's three dirt races on Saturday that have horses looking to repeat in them. Elite Power in the sprint, Good Night Olive in the Filly and Mare sprint, and Cody's Wish in the dirt mile. I think a person could make an argument that all three of them perhaps might not be as sharp per se as they were last year. But I think Cody's Wish has the best chance of the trio to win on Saturday. And a lot of it goes to what Nick was saying. I do think that he has turned up his training. According to all reports, he's just training fabulously at Santa Anita. And I don't think the competition's there. I do think Zozo's a better 1-turn horse. So I think Cody's Wish he doesn't have to be, a 90% perhaps even of what he was last year, where he narrowly beat Cyberknife to win this year's edition, because I don't think it's a very strong field, Darin.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that point, Vance. We're getting a look here at Zozos winning the ACAC. I'll start with this since we're watching the replay. Is there a chance that this horse could steal the race wire to wire under the right circumstance, or is Cody's Wish just too good?
Yeah, I think there's a possibility. And if you kind of look back at the history of the dirt mile at Santa Anita, Speed has done pretty well over it. And I think the trend at Santa Anita in general in 1 mile races has kind of favored pace setters more often than not. So I think there's a possibility Zozos could upset. For Cody's Wish, kind of going back to the 2-turn, 1-turn argument. I mean, he hasn't been as dominant going around 2 turns as he has been around 1 turn as far as margins of victory. I think that's something to keep in mind. You all have mentioned the weakness of this field. Unfortunately, the attrition rate was affected by the scratch of Algiers and, of course, the unfortunate incident with Practical Move. So that does help Cody's Wish for sure. I think Cody's Wish is obviously the horse to beat. He's going to come down from his 9-5 morning line odds. Obviously, he's going to be a much shorter favorite, but is he invincible in the spot? Not necessarily.
Okay, interesting take. Nick obviously seems to be pretty convinced that he lays over the field. I kind of agree with Nick, but I'll certainly be paying attention to the racetrack to see if anything were to come to hand where possibly Zozos could steal away. There'll be no stealing away in the Breeders' Cup Filly at Mare Turf, and that's because this is one of the races, guys, where the international presence is just supreme. Overall, from top to bottom, one of the strongest group of international runners that we've seen in the Breeders' Cup in quite some time. And Vance, you're our international expert, so we'll certainly start with you. Just your overall viewpoint of this Filly and Mare Turf, and obviously the big two coming over being Warm Heart and Inspiral.
Yeah, definitely top heavy with those two as the top choices. Inspiral is the better filly on the form book, in my opinion. 4-time Group 1 winner, twice against males in the Prix Jacques Lemerroy. But in this particular spot, I find Warm Heart as the value play. An improving 3-year-old filly is coming off back-to-back Group 1 wins against Older in the Yorkshire Oaks and Prix Vermeil. Now, granted, both of those were over 1.5 miles. As was her win at Royal Ascot in the Ribblesdale, but she has won at 1.25 miles before against a Group 1 quality filly named Blue Stocking, and that's something that Inspiral just hasn't done yet. She hasn't run beyond 1 mile. This will be her first attempt going 1.25 miles. Now, in her favor, trainer John Gosden, who used to be a regular in the Southern California circuit, he knows the Santa Anita turf course as well as anybody. He thinks Inspiral will find a mile and a quarter at Santa Anita well within her scope. He might certainly be right, but at the price, I think Warm Heart is probably the filly to beat in this race.
If I remember correctly, I think Banks Hill, when she came into the Filly and Mare turf, she had not gone beyond a mile, and she simply blew the doors off the field that day, which is probably about almost 20 years ago now. It's hard to believe, at Belmont Park. So Inspiral kind of gives me a little bit of a vibe there. James, is there an American runner that can beat the two European invaders?
Well, I think the top candidate is In Italian from the rail. And listen, In Italian's coming off back to back losses, but I think a case could be made that neither, even though the turf is listed as firm in the First Lady and in the Diana, it perhaps wasn't. It's nowhere near as firm as she's going to get out there. They'd gotten some showers in the evening at Keeneland before that Saturday card, and it rained earlier in the week at Saratoga. The real key to the race, as far as any Italian's chances go, is whether or not Fev Rover or anybody else in this field is putting any pressure on her. Because to me, she has a chance, if she breaks running from that rail post, to get instantly clear under Joel Rosario. We've seen a couple of fillies made this point before with a similar profile, like mile or mile and a 16th, maybe mile and an 8 types in Day at the Spa and Intercontinental, get the trip going a mile and a quarter in the Filly and Mare turf and lead wire to wire. And I think In Italian, she's going to get the ground she wants for the first time, and since 3 starts back, and is a threat to lead all the way. What do you think, Nick?
Always a threat. Yeah, I was just going to ask Nick, do you think the international runners stand out here, or is there an American runner that's got some value to her?
I mean, it feels like they do kind of lay over the field. Watching those replays back and looking at some of the form lines of Inspiral, I certainly defer to Vance's opinion of these horses, the internationals, but they look tough. And it looks as if the American contingent, even I should say the North American contingent, with some of the Canadians involved as well, they're going to have to step up their game a lot, no doubt about it. I do think an Italian, as James said, gets the ground that she wants. She wants a bit firmer footing. This is not really a true mile and a quarter because they do run roughly the first eighth of a mile or so. I can measure with my eyes very quickly down the hill, and that does speed things up a little bit. We've seen horses do well on the front end in this race in the past, not with great regularity, but it does feel also as if this turf course might be quick enough so that you want to be a little bit more forwardly placed. We'll keep an eye on that throughout Friday as well. Bottom line, to answer the question, I think the North American contingent is going to really have to have their running shoes on because Inspiral and Warm Heart look like horses that are going to be exceptionally tough.
Couldn't agree more, and I think that sentiment is going to be a trend in the next couple of races that we talk about, with next up being the Breeders' Cup Mile. Where the European invaders certainly do, again, almost jump off the page at you. This is a race that you take a look. Maj has come over already and asserted herself. Master of the Seas has done the same. So get some European runners that have already come over here, Vance, and said, we can beat you. And then you have Songline coming over as well from Japan. That's all the buzz. Again, an extremely top-heavy international charge.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with Maj. 3-year-old filly, came over, ran in the Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup at Keeneland. First time running back since the 1,000 Guineas in May when she beat a really good filly named Tahira. Maj led wire to wire. First time over a mile and an 8. That was not her preferred distance by any stretch. And she just basically wanted on class over a fast closing Lindy. She cuts back to her preferred trip here and going a mile. One thing historically going against Maj is that although this race has been won by really good 3-year-old fillies in the past, think Miesk, think Ridgewood Pearl, Goldikova, and Six Perfections, they all had victories against older males, Group 1 older males going into the mile. She has never faced males before, so I think that's a potential hurdle for her. I'll quickly touch on Master of the Seas, who we've seen quite a bit of already. He's come over, won the Woodbine Mile very impressively, and then last time at Keeneland got run down by our best American grass horse, up to the mark in the final strides. we're seeing Master of the Seas at his peak form of his career. He just barely missed winning the 2,000 guineas as a 3-year-old, but he got sidelined quite a bit over the next couple of seasons. He wound up being gelded, and now we're seeing the fruits of the patience of Charlie Appleby and Godolphin right now. Unfortunately, he did draw up horse post 14 here. Um, that's very tough. However, we've seen horses like Caracante, Lure, and Six Perfections come from very wide draws on this turf course to win. Not to necessarily put him in their class of company, but I'm not as concerned about the post position perhaps as some of the others.
Yeah, definitely the wide draw is certainly a question mark. A lot of people had that kind of modern games type buzz off this horse, drawing similarities there in the Woodbine Mile. Nick, for yourself, obviously, again, the international contingent, extremely strong. Songline, the morning line favorite from your handicapping and your research, valid, legitimate favorite, or is this race a little bit more open than we think?
It's interesting from a couple of perspectives. One of which is that I think the Japanese contingent is going to take a lot of money in general in here. I think the memories of the strong run in 2021 at Del Mar are going to be pretty fresh, where we saw Love's Only You win. We also saw Marshall Lorraine win. Since then, it feels like we've seen the Japanese runners win just about at least a race on every meaningful card throughout the world. And so everybody is hip to this. I think all of the Japanese horses are going to be maybe marked down a point or more for that very reason. So I think a horse like Songline, like Ushba Tesoro, even Sharyar, these are horses that are going to take more money than they should. And that being said, Songline should be the favorite in this race. She is the best horse on paper in terms of form. There are some question marks, in my opinion, and I think Vance will give you a better idea of what some of those are, but she seems like a legitimate favorite. Master of the Seas is a horse that will still take a tremendous amount of money, even from that outside post. See, I think odds-wise, the way it'll shake out is I think Maj's price will come up, and I think Master of the Seas price will either stay there or even potentially go down for a couple of reasons, one of which is that I don't think the post is as much of a worry. Now he's in one stall more with a scratch coming out of there, and he has an extreme running style. He's coming from off the pace anyway, so whether he goes wide is really not that big a deal. It's more of a pace situation than it is a post situation, in my opinion. And the Charlie Appleby runners, despite him not having as much success in America this year, they have been bet very heavily in every race where he has had a major player. I don't expect this to be any different.
James, the value in the race, if you find an American runner that you think has a chance, it seems to be that you're probably going to get a square enough number. Anything in this field from the U.S. North American contingent that you think can stack up against these international runners?
Well, I mean, they're going to be up against it like everybody's talked about so far. I will say this, Songline is like a stone cold closer. So it'll be interesting to see how she gets out of the gate. I think that's an issue for Ushba Tesoro. If you're backing her at less than 5-2, I don't think you want to be dead last early in this field because Maj, to me, has more tactical foot. She might be on the lead. And if that's the case, it could be advantage to her. But as far as the Americans go, I'm intrigued by Cheryl Spite, perhaps more for a vertical exotic perspective. Ran second last year in the Breeders' Cup Mile, comes in off a second to Master of the Seas in the Woodbine Mile. And I know a 3-year-old that Vance had mentioned that's sort of grown on me a little bit, sort of for the same perspective is More Than Looks. I do think that this colt is coming to hand right now in a sense, and he's going to have to step up and run the race of his life. But we see 3-year-olds do this in the Breeders' Cup before. So I think from perhaps like if you have a strong opinion on one of these Euros, you have an opportunity perhaps to get some value underneath of them if they do prevail for you.
Yeah, part of me is rooting for Casa Creed here just to see him. He's such a cool horse, but I think if the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint was down the hill at 6.5, he probably would have had a much, much better shot there than he does against this field. Vance, we'll swing back to you just really quickly here to give you an opportunity on Songline. We watch the European runners quite a bit face each other, and we get a decent feel, but Songline, we really don't have any idea what it is that she's running up against in Japan. So can you put that in perspective, like what she's beating and how that stacks up to what she's facing here?
Yeah, she's been beating Group 1 horses in Japan for sure in some of her major wins over there. But the thing is that they don't travel outside of Japan too often, and so we just don't have that collateral form we can compare her to. Now, a couple of seasons ago, or early 2022, she did run in Saudi Arabia in a 6.5 furlong race on the Saudi Cup undercard, where she did face Casa Creed, and she did prevail over him by a narrowing margin at the end. So we've got that kind of form line to compare her to. But as you said, Casa Creed's going to be a bit of a long shot here. So, and I do go back to James's point about her being a closer in a race where this is just going to be a congested field, and this is a tighter configuration that she's used to running over and a shorter stretch. So she seems like a potential underlay in the odds when you consider all of those factors.
All those factors definitely play into the next race we're going to talk about as well, the Breeders' Cup Turf. And they played into it several years ago when Shamie Heffernan put forth one of the greatest rides in Breeders' Cup history aboard Highland Reel, where he threw down the gauntlet in the backstretch, said, "Catch me if you can," and nobody could. This year's Breeders' Cup Turf, again, no surprise, a strong international contingent. But let's start talking about an American runner. And Nick, I'm curious, we'll start with you for your take on this. Up to the Mark, I love him. I think he's a great horse. I just think he's in the wrong race. I am shocked that he is not in the Breeders' Cup Mile.
Yeah, me too. Not quite as shocked as I was to see Fierceness in the Juvenile, but I am surprised. Same connections and seeing Up to the Mark here. He ran so efficiently in this race. He was held up. When he got out, he finished strongly. He's got some tactical speed. It's a slow-paced mile. He just doesn't really give off a lot of vibes that he wants a mile and a half, even with that impressive win in the Manhattan earlier in the year. And the other problem is that the two international runners in here that are going to garner the majority of the support are very, very good. And I'm not shortchanging King of Steel. It is surprising to see Up to the Mark in here. I expected him in the mile as well. But maybe it's a sign of confidence. What I do know is I can't bet on it at 5-1.
James, we'll stick with Up to the Mark here, give you an opportunity to talk about this U.S.-based runner. Are you as surprised as we are that he's not running in the mile?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think he was on a course to take a shot at the mile after the Manhattan, and then he had a little minor issue, and he missed 2 months of training, and that's the only reason he ran in the Coolmore Mile. And like Nick said, I mean, it's unfortunate it didn't work out the way they had probably initially planned it, but it didn't, and I think he would have had a much better chance. He could run a really good race and be fifth in here because of the depth of the Europeans. I was a little surprised to see Mostadov be the 5-2 morning line favorite. I do think August Rodin is going to be the favorite come post time. Wouldn't be surprised to see King of Steel be second. But I will point out, these two, August Rodin and Mostadov, have a similar form line rival where they both ran against Luxembourg. August Rodin ran against him in his victory in the Irish Champion, beat him by a half length that day. We're looking at Mostadov's race at York, I believe, where he wins the Juddmonte International, but 2 starts back in the Prince of Wales, he drilled Luxembourg by 4 lengths. Luxembourg was a second place that day in a deep field. So I think the difference is most stuff hasn't been running at the mile and a half distance per se, a lot of mile and a quarter starts as much as the others, but I think he'll handle the distance just fine, and I'm giving him a slight edge in that race, Darin.
Vance, this race is right up your wheelhouse, and I'll give you kind of open road here. But one of the things that I didn't note on Mostadov was that his lone win at 12 furlongs was on synthetic, which seemingly would probably be against softer company than what he's seeing here. Is there anything to the fact that this horse is 0 for 4 going a mile and a half on turf?
He's had some excuses going a mile and a half. The last time he tried it was in Dubai last March, and of course he ran into a nice horse named Equinox, who is the highly rated Japanese performer. He lost by 7 lengths there. Mostadov ran in the Arc last year. The ground was bottomless. He didn't handle it at all. And then before he won on the synthetic, he did run one good. He's run one good race going a mile and a half, but he got upset in the Princess of Wales Stakes last summer at Newmarket, and he lost to Broome, who's going to be a huge long shot in this edition of the Turf. So he's kind of like in Spiral. John Gosden thinks if he's going to get a mile and a half anywhere, it's going to be here at Santa Anita. He might very well be right, but at the morning line price of 5-2 or anywhere around there, I'd be leaning against him.
The other two major international runners are August Rodin and King of Steel. August Rodin has beaten King of Steel 3 times, but there is a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde to August Rodin too. When he's good, he's very good. When he's not good, he doesn't really show up at all. So I guess the two questions are: one, can King of Steel turn the tables on August Rodin, and which version of August Rodin Vance is going to show up?
Yeah, you mentioned the 3 losses King of Steel has had against August Rodin. The first time was when they were 2-year-olds. August Rodin was going into the Futurity Trophy as an odds-on favorite, and King of Steel was coming off a maiden win like 10 to 12 days beforehand. So advantage August Rodin there. Then they faced each other in the Epsom Derby. August Rodin had a prep, a bad one in the 2000 Guineas. King of Steel had no prep whatsoever. It was his debut as a 3-year-old. August Rodin prevailed, but not by much at all, over a very testing course at Epsom. August Rodin ran another bad race in the King George VI at Ascot in July, and King of Steel actually outfinished him there, finishing very good third behind the quality older horses Hookham and Westover. And then their most recent meeting was in the Irish Champion over a Leopardstown course that August Rodin had winning experience over. King of Steel did not. So I think King of Steel has had some excuses against August Rodin in the past. He comes off of a very demanding but really good win in the Champion Stakes 2 weeks ago at Ascot. That was over a very soft course that I don't think King of Steel necessarily liked, but he showed his class getting up to running down the very nice filly via Sistina. Obviously, the 2-week turnaround is going to be a major concern. He's not going to be as fresh, but he's going to love the firm going at Santa Anita. He's looked a picture perfect this week from according to a lot of the people that have been on the track there. So I'm giving King of Steel the edge here against August Rodin, because, as you said, we just don't know which August Rodin is going to show up.
Nick, your thoughts here? These three big international runners, King of Steel back in 2 weeks, version of August Rodin, or do you land in the corner of an American to pull what would be a pretty big upset here?
Yeah, I think I favor Augusta Rodin just a little bit over Mostadaf. I do think King of Steel is dangerous as well. I think the American horse is going to be overlooked as well, like Goddess, and I'm not ready to completely dismiss her. I do think she's going to have to run a lot better, but in a faster-paced mile-and-a-half race, she has a much bigger chance. And I think we saw last time what she can do in a faster-paced race. Obviously, Get Smoking coming out of here is a little bit of a difficult thing for Warlike Goddess, because she really would have benefited from there being even more speed. Balladeer, I know, will set the pace, and there'll be a few runners in here that are somewhat forwardly placed, but I think she's still a little bit interesting, though I envision Mostadaf and Augusta Rodin really one of the two being in the exacta almost under any circumstance.
A look at the Breeders' Cup turf, where Nick thinks pace could play a part in Warlike Goddess. Another race that is going to maybe entirely come down to pace is the big one, even though it's not the last Breeders' Cup race, which is going to be weird. But it is, of course, the $6 million Breeders' Cup Classic. In this race, Arabian Night, drawn to the outside, installed as the 3-1 morning line favorite. The other pace likely coming from Saudi Crown, from the Pennsylvania Derby winner. Nick, I'll come right back to you here. Morning line favorite, Arcangelo is out. This race now becomes extremely interesting from a betting standpoint. Arabian Night, is he the most likely winner of the race? And what's the right price on him if you're a backer?
I mean, I think without hesitation now, he'll be the favorite. I kind of thought Arcangelo was going to end up the favorite. I would have probably made him the morning line favorite, but obviously with him out, it looks as if Arabian Night, based on some of what we've heard about the workouts, what we've seen with the pace that he possesses. The problem he runs into is Saudi Crown being in here. I think Darin the White Abario is going to take more money than he's been assigned on the morning line. I feel like everybody who I consider to be sharp, and maybe I need to be around different people, but everybody who I consider to be sharp is on White Abario. So I feel like he is going to be kind of the sharp player's horse. He looks very good on the Thorograph sheets. He looks very good on Bristnet speed figures. He looks very good on speed figures, period. And I think that's something that ends up winning out at the end of the day. So I'm envisioning him getting a lot of money. But I think the pricing is proper. Arabian Night will end up a relatively solid favorite, probably around 5.
And speaking of sharp money, he looks very good on the Ragozin sheets too. So that's why a lot of the Sharpies are on White Abario for sure. James, your thought here: Arabian Night speed to the outside is going to have to contend with Saudi Crown. Do we like Arabian Night? What's a fair price on him? What do we think?
I mean, I definitely think it's going to be interesting to see the dynamics. I mean, if he can sit a comfortable second, I mean, he's going to come busting out of there. But Saudi Crown, I mean, he's going to go from post 6. I mean, he's drawn inside, he's drawn right in the middle, and he ran 44 and change on the lead 3 starts back. So he's got all this speed in the world, and he's just improving. So he's a colt that's going to affect the pace in the race. I'm not saying Arabian Night can overcome having to deal with him on the front end, but he's not going to get that same trip he got last time in the Pacific Classic. I do think that Ushba Tesoro is going to take some real money. I think a lot of people are going to fancy his chances as well as White Abario. And if you get past those horses, I look at somebody like Zandon or even Proxy coming up off of 2 good races, who's just coming into the race in good form. They might have a small chance, but probably more realistically in the money, like a minor award. But it's not that deep a field with win contenders there and with the defections.
Yeah, and there's a wild card, and you mentioned Ushba Tesoro, and Vance certainly will give you an opportunity to talk about Arabian Night and the pace, but you're our go-to guy when it comes to Ushba Tesoro. We saw him in the Dubai World Cup. Not sure how strong that field was. Algiers was going to be a player in the dirt mile potentially. But taking a look back at Ushba Tesoro, who, by the way, won this race from dead last, which is not a way that I think he could win this particular Breeders' Cup Classic. What's your overall take on him? Do you like him? And if you do like him, what type of price is fair value?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it was the strongest Dubai World Cup, and it would have been really nice to have seen Algiers in the dirt mile just to kind of get an idea of how good he was and compare Ushba Tesoro to him. So that's unfortunate. One of the assets of this horse is that he is 6 for 6 at 1.25 miles or slightly longer. I mean, this horse is going to run all day, and of these horses in the Breeders' Cup Classic, there's just not a whole lot of 1.25 mile form on most of them to hang your hat on. So distance obviously is going to be no concern. He's been running over tracks where the stretch is a lot longer. As you said, he's a deep closer. He's just not going to have that much stretch around ground to work with at the very end of this race. There was a lot of talk early in the week where he was kind of acting up in his in the stalls and in morning training. I think that kind of leveled off by midweek, and he was much better going in. But you don't like to see those kind of hiccups. As everybody has alluded to, he's going to take some money. He was fairly low on the morning line, 4-1. There's still just a lot of questions he needs to answer here. I think 4-1 seems like an underlaid price to me. So if I'm going to like him at all, I'm going to demand 5, 6, and upwards, which I don't think anybody's going to get.
Nick, we'll finish up with you. A lot of people were high on the 3-year-olds coming into this Breeders' Cup Classic. Arcangelo, of course, was a big part of that, among others. Now that there have been these defections, is there an older horse in this field that you think you give a stronger chance to now than maybe, let's say, you did about a month ago?
Yeah, Zandon, for sure. I would have laughed if you told me that I was liking Zandon for the Breeders' Cup Classic, but he kind of just has stayed around long enough to get a little bit of attention here. He now ends up with the rail with Arcangelo coming out. I thought his Woodward was very good. I know he didn't beat much. O'Connor was up the track, did end up coming back to win the Fayette. Now, we've had a couple of other performances that have been okay. They've not quite been at the same level speed figure wise, but I think Zandon is a horse that's going to outrun expectations. He's a steady, one-run grinding type, and I think the mistake that I made in assessing his form earlier in his career is I thought he wanted to go shorter, and now that he's gotten a little older, I think maybe he should have been going longer the whole time with that steady style, and I think Frankie Dettori will get him into a nice good beat towards the back of the pack, maybe not quite as deep in the pack as a horse like Ushba Tesoro, but I'm on board with him at around 12 to 1 or so.
The old adage, when a horse finally wins a race, sometimes they reel off a couple in a row, and that could certainly be the case here with Zandon. James, I want to post on the board just to show the fans out there and the handicappers how things have changed. Your fair odds prior to the defections look something like this. There have been so many horses now that have been withdrawn. Of course, Arcangelo. You yourself have had to go back and kind of readjust these in your own mind. So where do you expect to find fair value, considering that this is what your fair odds might have looked like just a week ago?
Yeah, I mean, and not only Arcangelo, but had the ill-fated Go Rocket Ride in the mix too. So that definitely, affected the prices of Arabian Night and Ushba. I mean, they would come down a little bit, obviously. I think, I think just like Nick had said about Zandon, I mean, there's a horse who had placed or had run second, third, or fourth in 8 straight starts without ever being a serious threat of winning, and he wins a race like the Woodward by nearly 5 lengths. That's a positive performance. So I would drop him down to maybe like 8 to 1 range, but and White Barrio as well. I'm not keen on White Barrio going 1.25 miles. He had lost his last 3 2-turn starts before the Whitney. I don't think it's the right fit, but the company might be a case where he's so talented he might be able to get it. So I would drop White Barrio and Zandon down to 8 to 1 range, and I would come down a little bit on Arabian Night and Ushba Tesoro. I mean, there's not a lot of like serious win options, I think, once you get past those top 2.
Yeah, if White Barrio goes off 8 to 1, regardless of my overall view of him, I might be betting with both fists in this particular race. I think he's going to go much lower than that, as Nick had alluded to. But before we call it a session here, we want to give out our best bets and our best fades of the Breeders' Cup weekend. So, Nick, let's start with you. Just a quick on both of them. Your best bet of the weekend and the horse that you're looking forward to fading the most.
Yeah, big redemption shot to me for Clariere in Saturday's Breeders' Cup Distaff, coming into this race a little bit like last year off a layoff following a surprisingly dull performance in the Personal Ensign. This year, I think you can attribute it to the wet track. I think she's going to get far more pace to run at than she has in any of her prior starts this year, and I'm expecting the real Clariere to show up. I love the strategy that Steve Asmussen has used over the years, sending his horses out here early to get acclimated. She's reportedly trained very well. My best fade is Master of the Seas. I don't want a horse from post 13 that I think has just been slightly above average in his 2 starts in North America. I think you really are going to require him to run quite a bit better in here to contend, and I don't want any part of him at or around 7 to 2.
Real quick on Clariere, 1 for 8 at 1 1/8 miles. I don't know why the extra 16th of a mile seems to do something. Is there anything to that, or you think that's just a bit of an odd stat that means nothing?
Yeah, a bit of a curiosity, right? I mean, if she gets an outside run last year, maybe she's 2 for 8 and wins the Breeders' Cup Distaff. So, I think it's just been something that's been situational for the most part, especially with her style, where you'd think 1 1/8 miles would be better than 1 1/16 miles. But I think some of those, her 0 for Saratoga record, save the Chuvie last year, has certainly contributed to that looking as dull as it does.
James, the Distaff is a race that 3 of us are going to talk about. You're one of them. Or your best bet and your best fade?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Idiomatic, you're not going to see a filly that loses an entry-level allowance race at Turfway Park in December. You don't expect her to be in the mix for being the best dirt, female the following season. But Idiomatic did that. She ran a whole bunch of times at Turfway in the winter. She lost her first return to dirt in the Ruffian. But I think the progression she's made in the last 4 starts, her performance in the Personal Ensign that day, on the Brisnet speed number, she got a 106 number. That's the fastest number any of these runners have earned this year. And I think she's going to take a step forward off that spinster and just crush them in the Distaff. And I'll bet Search Results and Clariere underneath her. As far as my best fade, I'm against Elite Power in the sprint. I thought Elite Power was Jackie's Warrior. If you were against him, it was a terrible field that he beat last year. CZ's Rocket was second. I thought the best race of his career came in February in Saudi Arabia. I've been underwhelmed by his last 3 performances, and part of my strong fade against him is I don't think he can beat Speedboat Beach or Dr. Scheibel at Santa Anita at 6 furlongs on Saturday, so I'm fading Elite Power.
Okay, I'm actually in the same camp as you. It's not my best fade, but is one of the horses I'm looking forward to fading. Vance, for you, best bet of the weekend and your best fade.
Yeah, I mentioned both of them earlier in the show. My best bet is She Feels Pretty in the Juvenile Fillies turf. She was just so eye-catching winning the Natalma at Woodbine. She was just automatically shot up to the top of my list for this race. The competition from Europe is pretty soft, seemingly. I expect her to have a really good trip in this race, and I think just because of the numbers in the field, I mean, she's kind of looking to be a lukewarm favorite. 7-2, 4-1. I'll take those odds all day long on her if that indeed is what she goes off at. My fade is August Rodin and the turf for the reasons I mentioned. I think King of Steel has a big opportunity to turn the tables on him for the first time, really. In the turf, and then Mustadov obviously is going to probably be a huge factor in there as well. And so, as a 5-2 favorite, August Rodin for me, I think is a horse worth taking on with the other 2 Europeans.
My best bet comes in the distaff, same as 2 others, and it's a different horse. In a million years, I never thought that this would have been my best bet in the distaff when it looked like Next and Clairiere were going to lay over this field 3 months ago. But Pretty Mischievous is my best bet of the Breeders' Cup distaff, and I think it comes down to pace. I think there's going to be a very hotly contested early pace. A lot of the key contenders in this race want to be forwardly placed. When that happens, it typically ensures a good clip. And I remember the Breeders' Cup distaff a few years ago when March Lorraine came from out of the clouds to give me my sickest beat, probably in the history of the Breeders' Cup, when I needed Dunbar Road for a lot of different wagers. I'm looking for Pretty Mischievous to have a similar type of run here, move that speed figure up just a touch to pull off a little bit of a surprise against the older Fillies and Mares. And my best fade is in Italian. I think she's facing a much stronger contingent here with especially the European runners that are coming in. I know she's got a speed advantage over some of them, but I think she's just facing a stronger group here. And at anything close to 4-1, I really don't want any part of her. And I don't think she's been as good this year as she was going into the Breeders' Cup last year. So a couple of reasons there. While I'll be against in Italian in the Filly and Mare turf. Well, that puts a wrap on our Breeders' Cup discussion for Nick, James, and Vance. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget, we have our money back offer at TwinSpires, up to $10 back on all the Breeders' Cup races. You get your money back if your win bet up to $10 finishes second and third. That gets underway tomorrow for Breeders' Cup Friday. And of course, we have our Breeders' Cup Ultimate Handicapping Package there at Brisnet.com. Past performances, analysis, picks, everything that you need to know about the Breeders' Cup at our home for past performance data, Brisnet.com. So be sure to check that out. So once again, for Nick, Vance, and James, this is Darin Zoccali signing off, wishing you the best of luck this weekend with all of your wagers at the Breeders' Cup.